like leading it off. Thank you for having me here tonight. I am here representing State Senator Anthony Dinniman. He would be here, but they are in session this evening, or today, and was unable to make it. He sent me on his behalf. And it is a pleasure being here. This is a project. This is an area that I've worked on in his office for a number of years. Senator Dinniman is committed towards environmental protection throughout Chester County and the Commonwealth. This is something that he has been committed to going back to when he was a Chester County Commissioner. Started along with the other commissioners, and Chester County started the Landscapes program, which are currently moving into Landscapes 3. Landscapes program, Landscapes is a comprehensive plan for Chester County. It's developed in order to provide funding for purposes such as environmental open space preservation, parks and trails, things of that sort. This is something that makes Chester County a wonderful place to be. It gives a sense of place that we've come to really appreciate in Chester County. This is something that Senator Dinniman, Commissioner Dinniman, and then Senator Dinniman has championed for years. And he wanted me to come here tonight and thank you for everything you're doing for the community, moving things forward, and that he supports your efforts. This is it's never easy getting involved as a citizen, getting involved in the process. It's daunting, it's complex, and it sometimes seems that it's working against you. Being here tonight and being involved as you are is extremely important for the democratic process. And on behalf of Senator Dinniman, thank you. Keep it up. Keep being involved. Continue to be involved. And I think you will see results. And on behalf of everyone that's involved, from the community leaders, the Delaware Riverkeepers, this is important. And I know the presentation tonight is just a piece of that, the longer process that will take place. So thank you, and I appreciate giving me a few minutes to speak here tonight on behalf of the Senator. Thank you very much.
Thank everyone for coming. I know this is obviously a very important issue to the community, the neighborhood, and we appreciate your efforts to make this more visible to the rest of the town. Just so to go over where we are at the township level, as you're aware, the zoning was changed back in 2014, 3 years ago. At this time, the plan that's pending before the township is on appeal before the zoning hearing board issued an order, and that has been appealed to the Common Police Court. That probably will take who knows how long. That's the status of the township pursuit, or the developer's pursuit at the township level. While that's been going on, the township has applied for a $50,000 grant from DEP, and that money will allow the township to hire its own independent experts on the legal side and the scientific side, so we can monitor what the applicant developer is promoting or saying. That application has been submitted, and we're waiting for approval on that. As you all probably are aware, during the process we also requested an extension of the time for the comment period for the prospective purchaser agreement, and that allowed many of you to provide more comments to DEP. And the other thing that we did, which was just mentioned, we withdrew support, as did the Senator, for the DCED grant, $1 million grant to the developer for him to use all of our tax money to purportedly clean up the site. And finally, weekly, daily, we are continuing to reach out to DEP for meetings between the township and DEP in order to hopefully find a better solution. And that's where we are. Anybody ever has any questions, please contact us, contact me through the township and the website. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor. We appreciate your support, so thank you very much. Do we still want to introduce our speakers tonight? Okay.
We can introduce them.
Okay.
Oh, here, yeah.
But before we do that, just one second. Just a quick FYI. Just a quick FYI to save the date. The General Warren Village, members of the General Warren Village are hosting a Beef and Beer community fundraiser. It will be held on Saturday, November 4th, from 7 to 10 p.m. at the American Helicopter Museum. The funds generated from that beef and beer will be used to support the vision for a clean and green Bishop Tube. We invite you all. We hope you all show up. Please tell your friends and your family. You are all most welcome. We are all your neighbors, so please, you're most welcome. And then also, for more information, please visit generalwarrenvillage.com.
Along the same lines, like Rachel just mentioned, is that some of our community members are in a appeal the steep slope. It's costing some money. So this beef and beer is to help us raise money to pay for our lawyers' fees. And there's also a donation box in the back and t-shirts which will support both the Delaware Riverkeeper and the efforts to pay our lawyers' fee as we fight the zoning, appeals the zoning decision.
Why are we here tonight? Well, we're here because we are all in pretty much in serious danger. The proposed Bishop Tube development is a danger to the health and safety of the residents of this community, of residents who live downstream Valley Creek, and of the larger portion of the area. There's a 1-mile plume extending northeast of the site, which has caused contamination from the site to flow through waterways and groundwater well beyond the parameters of the site and to put a broader portion of this area in danger. One of the key chemicals at the Bishop Tube site is TCE. It's a known cancer-causing contaminant that has caused cancer and also heart disease in many people. This is documented and supported by research from various federal and state and local agencies, public health agencies, and environmental agencies. The proposed development is essentially proposing, I'm not there yet, I'll get there. The proposed development is essentially the developer wants a partial cleanup, and it is just that, a partial cleanup. A partial cleanup that would essentially leave contaminants in perpetuity for many, many years, for decades to come, because the actual topsoils or the soils that would be remediated only reflect a small portion of the property, and it would leave saturated soils and groundwater contaminated for many years to come, which would effectively threaten most of us. We're here tonight to talk about some of the concerns, and I'm introducing that, but we are going to go into some various we're going to have a good conversation tonight about why Bishop Tube's development is dangerous and why it needs to be fully cleaned up. In terms of the concerns that we have as a community, based on all the knowledge that we've learned, we firmly reject all current and future proposals to develop the Bishop Tube land site. The current proposal is extremely dangerous. It is a direct harm to the health and safety of all we hold dear, especially our family, our children, our spouses, and it is a current and direct threat to our environment and to our economic well-being. Our concerns and our fears are reasonable from this development and are scientifically founded, but our trust in public officials to remedy this has been in deterioration. We look forward to effective dialogue with our representatives and public officials, and we're hoping to turn a new leaf. But to date, we have not had our needs met as a community. In terms of our demands as a community, number one, acknowledge the danger, the full danger. Bishop Tube is a chemically toxic site and the proposed development remediation process reflects significant dangers to the public health, safety, and well-being of us and the environment. We demand a full cleanup of the land site with absolutely no exceptions. There's no partial measure here that's acceptable to the community at all, and it never will be. Full cleanup, the highest legal standards, with a publicly transparent process that can be monitored by the community, and that will encourage dialogue between monitors and the community as this cleanup process occurs. 3, having cleanup costs fully paid for by responsible parties. 4, we need and demand that all officials and the state deny a state grant for partial cleanup to the developer. $1 million has been requested by the developer in taxpayer subsidies, our money, to support a cleanup that would effectively, that he already stands to make millions from. That is unacceptable. 5, protect the Bishop Tube site after it's fully cleaned up as a natural open space for the community. This community has suffered enough from Bishop Tube. You'll hear from some tonight who've been affected from the health and safety dangers from this site, and we are not going to stand for anything else than a clean and green Bishop Tube site. You don't need to pay attention to everything here. The one thing that this slide conveys most is that since 1951, Bishop Tube has been in operations and has presented a danger to the community for decades. In 1972, high levels of fluoride were detected in Little Valley Creek. TCE was found in groundwater in 1985, flowing underneath our homes. In 2017, the township was informed by a federal public health agency, CDC, a subdivision of them. And this is, by the way, this is as cautious as you come in political language. Because of significant contamination at the Bishop Tube site, other uses for the property besides residential should be considered. In a private conversation, I'm sure there would be, don't put anything residential there, period. There is imminent danger from it. What's being proposed? As I said before, a partial remediation that would only remediate upper level soils and saturated soils at mid-depth and bedrock, which contain harmful and toxic levels of TCE and which are flowing from groundwater and threatening us all, would never be remediated. The actual remediation would focus on 3 hotspots, not the entire property, which is also contaminated. And then they would subsequently build new homes on that property, subjecting an entirely new population to dangers of cancer and other public harm. Other effects from the Bishop Tube community or development are that the overdevelopment that would occur in this community. We all see enough traffic on Route 30, and we don't need more people driving through. Imagine what this community is going to look like with another 200 plus townhomes, whatever it may be, and families in there. We're going to lose our woodlands, excavation of steep slopes, and encroachment of wetlands from this development. It's unacceptable, and it's not going to happen. This is the partial remediation plan, a quick overview of it. The proposed excavation would only target areas 7 to 25 feet below soil surfaces. Meanwhile, the TCE compounds that reflect a danger to all of us, have been found at 55 to 60 feet at 128 parts per billion. And you don't have to worry about that just yet. Just wait to the next slide about the levels. 222 to 232 feet, 345 to 360 feet, and higher toxicity in other areas. And it's in our groundwater, as I said before. And an expert hired by the Delaware Riverkeeper Network said the following: There are substantial amounts of TCE and groundwater throughout the Bishop Tube site. Groundwater flowing beneath the site discharges to springs and to the Whittle Valley Creek just east of the site, both increasing the flow and the load of TCE discharging from that site. These streams transport TCE downstream to Valley Creek and the Schuylkill River. Incidentally, the proposed remediation plan would effectively take old soil and move it and fill a lot of that with gravel. That same report indicated that may actually escalate the volume of TCE that goes in our groundwater. How toxic is Bishop Tube? And this is what I was talking about before with the parts per billion. The state standard for cleaning up is 5 parts per billion. So just say 5 to a billion. 1 part per billion is about 1 drop of water in a swimming pool, an Olympic-sized one. The highest levels of Bishop Tube toxicity have been tested at 1.9 parts per billion. This is a disaster. This is a danger. And we need to clean this up completely, and we need to absolutely end this development because it reflects a danger to all we hold here. We stand here tonight, we've done this research, and a lot of this information has been withheld from us. From the DEP and from a variety of other sources of information, we've been kept out of the loop about these dangers, and we found this on our own. And through the help of the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. We are thoroughly appreciative of that, because we would have never had this information had it not been obtained through essentially a right-to-know request to the state. We would completely be flying without any vision right now of what we're facing if it wasn't for DRN. So we're grateful for it. And now I'd like to introduce you to David Wurst. David was a former employee at the Bishop Tube site, and he'd like to talk about some of what we've just been talking about.
Good evening, everyone. As John just introduced me, I am David Wurst, for those who don't know me. I moved in, or my family moved into Denmark Village in 1958. I was a young boy back then. Grew up in the village. 1972, I unfortunately went to work at Bishop Tube. Spent 18 years there. I left there in 1989 as president of the United Steelworkers of America, Local 70/66. We once a proud company back then. But I know that there is much more going on there than the 3 areas that we are pointed out to, the 3 hotspots. I know there's been major leaks of TCE in the bottom alleyway. We had a 4,000-gallon holding tank down there. That leaked. It goes down into the railroad property. I also know that they have a hidden pipe that runs on the front end of the company by Main Road, the west side. It runs down under the bottom driveway, goes under the fence to the railroad, and it discharges into the railroad's swamp area, which leads down to the creek. I've had people testify to the DEP that they use that to get rid of their side blood. They use to get rid of it from the TCE when they have leaks, which they had many of over the years. They have a large tank over 40 feet long that sank in the ground. There was a big holding area underground with 3 giant tanks that they would have to shift it over to. Whenever the pump would break,
You got a little? Yes, yes, a little.
whenever the pump would break, then that whole area would fill with dry water. Then discharge through the pipe out into the areas by the railroad. I also know that they have the side load that's there that's discharged in. That's why Paul remembers the pond turning green, turning red, because of the colors of it. I know that they detected in leaks in tank 5 and 8.
Louder.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. I also know that there's several fuel tanks that are still on location. I also know that there's all areas of saturated soils with heavy metals. It's not being talked about here at all. Under the new building, there's 2 giant septic tanks. Those tanks hold a lot of heavy metals that caused problems starting in 1972 when the Commonwealth took papers from Bishop Tube and traced it back to the open lagoons they had back then. Since then, they went to the underground vaults, and they started transferring it up to another place, and they covered over the vaults with concrete. They also are talking about in Plant 8, the old acid tanks and the old septic tank outside of there with all the heavy metals. They're also not talking about the area outside of Plant 8 that they dumped everything, which is a big hotspot. So all of these are being overlooked here. You have multiple areas from almost the whole company. We all know that the TCE isn't just under those areas. It finds the bedrock, it goes through the cracks, and it can travel all over the place. Bottom line is, I noticed since 1980, going on 38 years, you see back there, there's been many tests and very little data. And I know that the people of John Warren Village and this community deserve better than what they've done.
My name is Kate Stauffer. I live in the village on Johnstock Road. We've been there almost 31 years maybe now. And I also do want to state that I am a mother of a daughter who is a survivor of 3 brain tumors. Real quick before I go into that, I just want to show you what, in response to what David just presented, that the TCEs have been known to be traveling down Little Valley Creek. Valley Creek, that's about a mile down at the water, and it has gone down to the groundwater. So it is extensive. The poison has gone pretty far. It's not just our community. It is a known carcinogen, and some of it has been linked to kidney cancer, liver cancer, lymphoma, congenital heart defects, Parkinson's disease. Not only is it TCEs, but these other contaminants are also on that land. The factory was in place. We moved in. My daughter was born in 1990. The factory closed in 99. During our time there, the smells of chlorine and all the stuff was always a weird smell there. I'm not sure I can link my daughter's brain tumors to this, but the amount of people with issues, diseases, cancers, Parkinson's in our immediate area is a concern of mine. And whether this is a link to my daughter's tumor specifically, I'm not okay with TCEs doing what they're doing and this land being, people being able to build on the land. And I'm all for cleaning it up as much as we can and then give it back to green space. Meyer, do you want to speak to Tom Myers?
I'm the Delaware Riverkeeper. For those of you who don't know, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network is a regional organization. We work throughout the 4 states of the Delaware River watershed: New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. And we also work at the federal level. And we are very concerned about what's happening at the Bishop Tube site. And one of the first things that I did when I became aware of the Bishop Tube site was I did what the Delaware Riverkeeper Network always does, is we hired some experts to start to help us evaluate what was happening at the Bishop Tube site, what was being proposed by the developer, what was the information that one could, what did the information tell us that you could find in the Department of Environmental Protection files. And these are just some of the findings of Dr. Tom Myers, one of the first experts that we had look at this. And really, what Dr. Myers has expressed is that you've got a very serious level of contamination at the site. And as you've heard, the contamination is leaving the site. The development project is only proposing a partial remediation, so all the additional contamination that's in the saturated soils, in the groundwater, in the creek that's leaving the site will remain after the developer undertakes his activities, his partial remediation plan, and his development proposal if he's allowed to move forward. Now, it's important to know that the Department of Environmental Protection is trying to hold responsible parties accountable. We do know that, who some of the responsible parties are, and they can be legally held to account for cleaning up the contamination at this site at their expense, not at our expense. So it's important to understand that it's not Mr. O'Neill and his development project, a partial remediation plan or nothing. It's his proposal with a partial remediation plan that leaves in place a significant level of toxic contamination that still has to be cleaned up. And who's it going to be cleaned up by? It's going to be cleaned up by the responsible party or others. So rather than have a partial remediation and this massive development project, we as a community have been working together to say we want total complete cleanup of the Bishop Tube site at the responsible party's expense. Now, the thing is, you've heard a lot about the toxic contamination at the Bishop Tube site, but developing the site in and of itself will present harm to the community. Development projects bring more contamination. They bring all kinds of contamination. You have roadways and driveways. You have lawns and lawn chemicals and lawn fertilizers, all of which are a source of contamination. The reality is that contamination runs off of the landscape every time it rains and enters the environment. It enters the environment through a number of pathways. Often it enters the environment through street inlets and gets discharged to our local creeks. There are a number of pathways. But we're dealing with a highly toxic site. To allow development of this site, particularly at the massive level that's being proposed, really adds insult to injury. And we're going to be exacerbating and magnifying the harms that are coming off that site, including into Little Valley Creek. Little Valley Creek is a tributary to Valley Creek, and the Valley Creek system, including Little Valley Creek, have a special designation under Pennsylvania law. They are identified as exceptional value creeks. That means they are supposed to be protected at a higher level. Now, obviously, Little Valley Creek is already suffering because of Bishop Tube. We don't want it to suffer anymore because it is one of the special streams in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that has this exceptional value designation. The other thing that happens with development is not only do you have new increased sources of pollution from the development that happens on the landscape, but you also get an increased volume of runoff that comes off of this now paved over landscape. So we'll be cutting down the trees and we'll be replacing all of those natural areas with hardened surfaces, whether those hardened surfaces are driveways and roadways and rooftops or are lawnscapes. Lawnscapes, according to science, are almost as hard as pavement when you're looking at it from a stormwater runoff perspective. The volume of runoff that comes off of a lawn is pretty close to the volume of runoff that comes off of the street, in other words. Increasing the volume of runoff has a number of serious implications downstream, including increasing flooding and flood damages and erosion. We already have problems downstream in the Valley Creek system with infrastructure projects being undermined because there's just too much water in the system. So if we develop the Bishop Tube site, one of the problems that we will be exacerbating is this problem of the volume of stormwater runoff that's being dumped into the creek and literally dumped on downstream communities. I want to take a little sort of aside to talk a little bit about the deal that Mr. O'Neill struck with the Department of Environmental Protection back in 2005. And it's sort of the story of why we're here talking about this development proposal starts back with this deal in 2005. When Mr. O'Neill was looking to buy the property, he went to the Department of Environmental Protection and he said, said, look, I want to be protected from the burden of, or from being responsible for all of the contamination at the Bishop Tube site, for which I was not responsible, for creating the contamination in the first place. But the fact of the matter is, under our law, when you purchase a contaminated site, there's responsibility that runs with the land for helping to deal with the cleanup of that site to ensure that you are not endangering others, that you are not bringing others to the harm. So there's a whole lot of complicated laws that come into play. But there is the opportunity for developers like Mr. O'Neill to try to limit their liability or come to an understanding with the state as to what they will specifically be responsible for. So it's sort of a known quantity. So back in 2005, Mr. O'Neill and Constitution Drive Partners approached the Department of Environmental Protection wanting to enter into one of these deals. And they entered into, what they entered into was a prospective purchasers agreement. And there's a lot of things in the prospective purchasers agreement, but the things that you and I care about is that in order for Mr. O'Neill to be protected from responsibility for the contamination at the site and what he wanted to do at the site, he had to agree to a number of things. He had to agree that the activities he undertook at the site would, look at red, not exacerbate any existing contamination. He had to agree to provide access so the DEP could continue to work with those other responsible parties to find pathways for dealing with the rest of the contamination that would be left on the site after Mr. O'Neill undertook his activities. At the time he entered into this deal with the Department of Environmental Protection, and they were identifying essentially what he had to do on the site as a result of this deal, Mr. O'Neill was talking about commercial redevelopment, not residential redevelopment. And you can imagine what the law requires and what DEP would expect for a commercial site is different than what you would expect for a residential site where you're bringing families and children to the site. So that all factored into this deal. And anyway, when all was said and done, Mr. O'Neill, for cutting this deal with DEP, received from the state a covenant not to sue. So if he did everything that he was supposed to do and lived up to his end of the deal, there was this covenant not to sue that protected him from being held to account by the Department of Environmental Protection. Now, this deal was renegotiated in 2007 and it was renegotiated in 2010. And as part of those renegotiations, Mr. O'Neill's responsibility, the activity he had to undertake to fulfill his remediation obligation was specifically identified as operating this system called a soil vapor extraction and air sparging remedial system. It's a mechanism for helping to remove TCE from the soils, from some of the groundwater on the site in the saturated soils and whatever the other zones are that they were targeting. That's what he had to do. And he still had to promise not to exacerbate existing contamination, to provide access, and he still got the benefit of this covenant not to sue if he fulfilled these new obligations. It was just very clear now what he had to do. But what we found when we looked at the records that we secured via right to know and file reviews is that actually in January of 2014, the Department of Environmental Protection wrote Mr. O'Neill a letter and said that, it's a long letter, but you have it in your hand so you can take some of it home. But the most important things that they said in this letter was that consultants working for Mr. O'Neill had engaged in activity that interfered with or impaired that system that he had to undertake and potentially exacerbated the existing contamination at the site. And as a result, the DEP removed that covenant not to sue. They removed it in January 28, 2014 because of their concerns about what was happening at the site by people working for Mr. O'Neill and when the site was under his control. And actually in July of 2014 and December of 2015 and June of 2017, that public meeting maybe some of you had attended, either through the Environmental Hearing Board actions or through direct statements by the Department of Environmental Protection, it was reconfirmed that the Department of Environmental Protection such that Mr. O'Neill was not entitled to this covenant not to sue, which is really a very significant determination to take that protection away. In the middle is when the township, on June 2014, after the first January 2014 removal of the covenant not to sue, it was later, 6 months later, that the township was presented with the idea, and in fact did act upon the idea that the site be rezoned as residential. It's our understanding from township officials that the DEP never bothered to tell the township about what had happened at the Bishop Tube site, that they were so concerned about it that they removed this covenant not to sue, and so that potentially when the township made that ever-important decision to change the zoning of the site, they weren't aware that all of this had happened. Either that, or perhaps some township officials did know, and they didn't properly consider that information, but we believe that it's the former from everything we've heard. Another important piece of information, and we actually have a copy of this letter in the back, is that as recently as April of 2017, the federal agency, they're part of the CDC, it's the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. Long story short, they think about these kinds of things, and they explicitly said in a letter to the developer, given the presence of significant contamination at the site, other uses for the property besides residential should be considered. It is important to note that even very low levels of trichloroethylene, the primary chlorinated solvent contaminant at the site, may be harmful, and great care must be taken to not allow exposures to occur. From what we can tell, we have seen no change in behavior or proposal by Constitution Drive Partners since the release of this letter. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Steve Schmidt to talk about some of the other ramifications for the community from having development at this site.
Hello, as Maya said, my name is Steve Schmidt. I'm a resident in the community, General Warren Village. And as we begin to wind this part of the presentation down, you've heard a lot of facts and figures and information tonight. I just want to leave you with a few lasting thoughts about what the development could be and what not developing the site could mean. So specifically, you've heard a lot about the potential impacts to the site. The corollary to that is it's left as a green and subsequently clean site. It increases the property values, and this has been shown in many communities, not only in our region, but across the country, where there is a green open site or a wooded area next to a residential community. It does help with property values and quality of life, which is an important consideration for people who live here and for people who live in other communities threatened by development. Again, there's some facts on here which are in your handout that you should also take a look at. If this site is developed as proposed, there's a drawing in the handout that you should consult which showed the potential number of townhouses that would be built there. It's called the massing plan. What we really have to ask is this an intelligent development design? First of all, it's very dense. It would be very small yards for people. It's adjacent to an active petroleum tank farm. It has one way in and out right now, which is under a railroad overpass. Could be problematic for school buses. You'd have to consider where the kids are going to gather in the morning to get the bus if the bus can't get under the overpass. Just think about moving vehicles, trying to get people into the site. There are a lot of concerns and considerations that go into whether the site is an intelligent design or not. You know, leave it to yourselves to decide whether or not you think this is an intelligent design. Certainly with those challenges, I question who would really want to live in a site like that. Development of the site may also lead to increased traffic congestion on Route 30 and Malin Road. which, if you're familiar with the community, is where the Morgan Close restaurant is. It's a little plug for the restaurant. But at that intersection is where the cars will be coming in and out of right now as proposed. If anybody has been in the General Warren Village community, the Village Way, which leads all the way down to the western end cul-de-sac, is a proposed emergency access. If the site is developed as proposed, it's only a matter of time before that emergency access is pressured to be open around the clock. Anybody who's driven on Village Way knows that that road cannot handle excessive volumes of cars and trucks, especially in a two-way mode, where you have people leaving for work and coming back in the morning. So it really begs the question again about whether it's an intelligent design and whether, in fact, leaving the site as is, although cleaning it, is a better option for the community and for the region in general. And lastly, as you give some thought to this and you go back and you think about what you've heard here tonight and what you can do specifically to help by contacting the township and just being educated and aware of what the potential development means to your home if you live in the community, or if you live in the area, or if you live downstream from the toxic site, it is a wooded site. There are a number of animals that make their home there, that add to the environment, that add to the peace and quiet to the western side of the community. That does act as a buffer to the petroleum tank farm. And those are things that should be considered when somebody looks to do some development on site. So with that, I'm going to finish up.
I'm going to finish with one last thought, but before I do that, we have some really important asks. So as John talked about earlier, one of the things the developer has been trying to do is get $1 million grant from the state in order to allow him to help fund his partial remediation plan so that he can prepare the land for his massive overdevelopment project. And again, after that, all of that is said and done, the saturated soils, the groundwater, all the contamination leaving the site would all remain in place until that gets dealt with at some unknown time to some unknown degree in the future. We just think that's not appropriate. We need to have the full plan and full cleanup today with this preservation as open space. Wonderfully, Senator Dinniman and Senator Leach have both gone on record with the state agency responsible for that grant and said, we do not support the giving of this grant for this partial remediation program. The township, as Supervisor Orlo said, the township, while they had at one point, before they were aware of all of this information, had said, sure, that's a fine idea, they very wisely, in response to the community request, went on record with the state agency and said, you know what, we're pulling back our support. But the Chester County Commissioners have not gone on record about the Bishop Tube site. And in fact, they have not been very welcoming to our efforts to really want to give them full information on what's happening at that site. So we have been reaching out to the Chester County Commissioners, but they need to hear from us more forcefully, urging them to withdraw their support for the $1 million grant and to actually make sure that no county entity participates in any way to help secure that grant. Because actually, for that grant to pass down eventually to the developer, you have to have some sort of county, municipal, or other public agency entity involved willing to accept the grant. And it's a little bit of a complicated process, but there has to be that involvement. And right now, the county is the one that has been targeted to carry the ball for the developer to help him get that grant. So we need those county commissioners to hear from everybody loud and clear. We want you to, in no uncertain terms, say that you oppose that $1 million grant, and to tell all of your county entities, you may not in any way, shape, or form seek to advance this partial remediation and development program. We have an action alert in the back to help you very quickly and easily get that letter out the door to communicate that message to the Chester County Commissioners. Of course, we want you to continue to come to supervisor meetings, There are acts that are coming up all the time. If you get on the Bishop Tube Facebook page, just look up Bishop Tube Clean and Green. You will find a Facebook page. That's a way to keep up to date on information and learn about what you can and should be doing to help defend the community from this proposal. On the Delaware Riverkeeper Network website, there's a Bishop Tube page where we put a lot of documents and information, where we have the documents that the recent SLAP suit that was filed by the developer to try to shut us up, which the court ruled in our favor. But it's good to know. If you want to know about all that information, you can find that on that Bishop Tube page. But the final parting thought that I want to bring to your community, that we are working to bring to every community across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and frankly, across the nation, is this idea that, we all have a right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. Unfortunately, for the most part, well, we all know that to be true. We believe that we have that right by virtue of the fact that we are people here on this earth. Under the law, our rights to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment are not well protected. When you look at state and federal laws, and how they act, they don't really work to stop inappropriate development or pollution. They work to permit it. Just before you're allowed to pollute, you have to get permission. But we are fortunate, and when you look at the Constitution, for the most part, across the nation, there is not constitutional level protection for people's rights to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. There's constitutional protection for your right to free speech, to freedom of religion, to private property rights, to all kinds of things. In New York State, you have a highest level constitutional right to gamble. But for the most part, across the nation, you don't have protected at that highest level under the Constitution the right to pure water, clean air, and healthy environment, except here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. In 1971, Article 1, Section 27 was placed in Pennsylvania's Constitution that protects people's rights to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. Now, from 1971 until 2013, that constitutional provision was ignored by government officials and by the courts because the courts deemed it not to have the full force and effect of law. They said very unequivocally in some legal determinations, this is great language, but it's merely a statement of public policy. It doesn't really have the same force that the provision about the right to free speech has, even though it's in the same section of the Constitution. But then we, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, along with 7 towns on issues having to do with fracking, we brought a legal challenge, and we challenged a law and used Article 1, Section 27 as one of our primary arguments against this horrific state law that had been passed. And wonderfully, in 2013, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, the conservative Pennsylvania Supreme Court, rendered a decision in December of 2013 that breathed life into Article 1, Section 27, and made very clear that you have a constitutional right to pure water and clean air and a healthy environment in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And even though a government agency can check the boxes and say, we honored this law or we honored that regulation in issuing a permit or rendering a decision, if after they've checked all that boxes, they still have not protected your constitutional right to a healthy environment, then that action is unconstitutional. We continue to build upon what it means to have a constitutional right in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but the important thing for you to know is that you have this right. It's a constitutional right. You are entitled to it, and you need to demand that every government official at every level of government honor this right, particularly when it comes to the Bishop Tube site, where we have had such horrendous and horrific actions by our government agencies that have brought us to this point today. Thankfully, we have 2 senators and we have township supervisors that are helping us turn the ship because we're holding them accountable. But I want you to leave this meeting embracing the fact that you have this right and really rising up to defend it, because the Bishop Tube site is a perfect example of why we need Article 1, Section 27. We want to see if you have any questions. We try to give a broad brush, but we want to see if we have any questions. And I'll let, do you want to moderate? Sean? have a question?
Sir?
Here.
Chuck Marshall from Valley Forge Travel Limited. What would it take to get the residential permit or the residential approval reverted back to commercial or not at all?
It's interesting,
Can
oh, okay.
we our supervisor?
And a good question, a very difficult answer. Once a property is zoned, whatever, in Pennsylvania, whether it's residential, commercial, industrial, and a land development plan is submitted to that use on that property, Pennsylvania law is that if you change the zoning of that property, it does not affect the plan. And it wouldn't affect the pending plan unless and until that plan was denied. And if denied, obviously went through all appeals and ultimately denied. That's the difficult part. That's all.
Are there any other questions?
Now, what are the risks of just leaving it like it is, and using the $1 million grant to buy the property back from the developer?
Yes.
So the question is, what are the risks of leaving the site the way it is and trying to use the $1 million grant for some other purpose? First off, the $1 million grant is specifically for remediation. It has specific uses. So one of the things that we would actually hope is that in our efforts, our community efforts, to get Bishop 2 fully cleaned up and protected as natural open space, there may come a time when the responsible parties will have fulfilled their obligations under the law to do the heavy lifting on the cleanup, but there might be a little bit extra that needs to be done in order for the site to become appropriate and safe for use as a park. And then maybe that grant could be applied for by the appropriate entities to do that additional work for that preservation. But just to sort of take that particular grant and use it for another purpose other than remediation is not allowed. For preservation as natural open space, there are other funds that could be used to help us accomplish that. And I believe Senator Dinniman's office referenced earlier in the conversations has said if we ever got to the point where we needed to pursue funds to help us accomplish that they might help us navigate finding those opportunities and pursuing them. So Don, you can throw a book at me if I'm saying that wrong. You're somewhere in here. But the final thing is in terms of not doing anything. The fact of the matter is it is a highly contaminated site. And one of our experts that we have looking at the site, who does this kind of work all the time, says this is the worst site he's ever seen. You know, we're talking about 1.9 versus some data points versus is it 5 micrograms per liter being the state groundwater standard, right? It's very contaminated, and the contamination is leaving the site, it's getting into the creek, it's going by groundwater, and the plume is spreading, and so the danger is spreading. So it's not a good idea for anybody to leave this site in this condition, but there's no reason to leave it in this condition because the state knows who the responsible parties are, and those responsible parties are very wealthy, and there is a law and there is a mechanism that can and should and is being used to hold them to account for cleaning up this site to the standards required under the law. So we don't have to settle for leaving it the way it is. We can and should expect that the responsible parties will clean it up for our benefit.
They can afford far better lawyers than we can hire out there.
The Johnson Matthey and Whitaker Corporation can hire better lawyers than me? No, they can't. I have the best lawyers there are. I'm just saying. I just believe in my lawyers. But They can hire, the greatest lawyers, but they can't evade the requirements of the law. And so we can and should hold them accountable. And with our state legislators, pushing on our DEP, or with the Delaware Riverkeeper Network pursuing litigation, and we issued a notice of intent to sue very recently against DEP because of our concerns at this site. There are many pathways to hold them accountable, so we're working hard to do that. Brian?
Yes, this is classified as a I won't do that.
Okay.
I can talk about it. This is classified as a Superfund site, correct?
Is it classified as a Superfund site? So the EPA does have it on their website, Superfund, identified as a Superfund site. The DEP and Brian O'Neill, bicker over whether it's officially Superfund or not. If you go to the EPA website, it's right up there saying it is. But that really, at this point, the Department of Environmental Protection and the Environmental Protection Agency have agreed. This site is listed under state law, and they have agreed that the state is going to be the primary government actor working to secure cleanup of this site and hold responsible parties responsible. The EPA is monitoring what they're doing. They share information. They talk on the phone. They have periodic meetings. EPA might give input. And if there ever came a time when we really could make the case that, we are thinking about how to do that, DEP had totally abdicated its responsibility to the degree that the Environmental Protection Agency needs to see. And there are certain standards there. Potentially EPA might get re-engaged. But for where we stand right now, the agreement between the feds and the states is that the state are lead and that they are pursuing the responsible parties under state law and federal law to get cleanup.
Okay, so per that paperwork I gave you, that is per se it is a Superfund site. So we can just say with that, but I'm just, if it came back to that per, O'Neill and trying to make us into a Superfund, that's why they're trying to push for that, so they can get around that corner what they're doing. So you have the paperwork for that, so then that hits the DEP. But that was a Superfund site, it should have been maybe clean for that paperwork you have.
So Brian, like so many others, and many of you, is working really hard to get information to help us in this battle. He's just talking about a study that he gave to me this evening, which is really terrific. Deb?
I'm sorry, I can't. I wanted to address something that was said about, leading it, okay? I was part of one of the initial people that started going to meetings and speaking up, and I live in the General Warren Village. I'm not the one that's affected by the plume. The plume isn't headed my way. The plume is headed across the street. The plume is headed over towards the Giant. The plume is headed back past People's Light Theater and all the way, we believe it, to down east. Now, these are our neighbors' friends. These are the children and grandchildren of my neighbors and friends. And I'm here to say that this is not a General Warren Village problem. This is an East Whiteland. This is a Phoenixville. This is, yes, all the way down to the Delaware River. Thank God for that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a Delaware Valley Riverkeeper helping us. But most of all, it's a Chester County problem and a Montgomery County problem. All right? It may be a million parts per billion or whatever way down the road, but right now, our friends and neighbors across the highway are being contaminated. So don't think that if we just let it go, that probably for me, to be honest, that would be best, because I'll probably outlive this thing ever. If we did that, I might be gone before they ever got around to finishing the battles. But meanwhile, my grandchildren live in this township, my children live in this township, my friends, the people I grew up with, are here, and the same for all of you. And that's why you need to spread the word, not just from General Warren Village, but downstream. Follow the groundwater.
What's the status now of DEP's determination of who's the potentially responsible?
So the question was, what's the status of DEP's determination of who's responsible? So DEP has specifically identified Johnson Matthey and Whitaker Corporation and are engaged in legal activities with them, negotiations, and there's a lot of effort. They are also trying to identify other responsible parties that are in the history, the timeline of the site. I think I'm trying to go back to the beginning. I think Christiana Metals, I think you see, for example, had a space in here. So I've heard that, they're potentially looking at them and others. So there are people firmly on the hook and are people they're looking to put firmly on the hook. In terms of what they're doing with Johnson Matthey and Whitaker Corporation, they are right now charging them, for lack of a better word, ordering them, making them identify the extent of the plume. How far has this actually left the site? There's additional data gathering that has been taking place on the site and around the site, and a lot of the emphasis at this point is how far has this extended? So what's the extent of the contamination that needs to be dealt with? And then once all that data collection has happened and you know what you're dealing with, then you figure out how you're going to deal with it. And that's one of the concerns at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. One of the things that we say is, why the hell has it taken all these decades to get to that point, right? We shouldn't be at the point where we have a spreading plume. We should have cleaned this up 2 decades ago when we knew about it, so there were no plume. But nonetheless, that's where we stand right now, and that's the status. Yeah.
My name's John. I live on Christie Village Way. I thought O'Neill was quoted that if he didn't get this $1 million grant, that he was going to pull out. Is that true? Or how much is he willing to put in to clean this thing up?
So the question was, it's been heard that Mr. O'Neill has said if he didn't get the $1 million grant, he would pull out. I don't know if anybody has heard him say that. I haven't specifically heard him say that. What I have seen in emails on the record as a result of our right to know request is Mr. O'Neill has made very clear that he, in a writing to DEP, and we cited in some of our documents you can find on our website, that he's not willing to put in more than, I think it's $500,000 towards the site. So he expects to get the $1 million, that he would sort of cap out at that. He's also asked for relief from other legal obligations, like buffer obligations that would mandate him stay a certain distance away from the exceptional value creek. So I can't fully answer your question. I can just tell you I've seen that written from O'Neill's representatives to the DEP in an email. I do think it is a widespread belief that this $1 million grant is vitally important to him. And that's why making sure our government officials understand that this is a wholly inappropriate use of state dollars. Those dollars should be used towards fully cleaning up the site, not a partial remediation that will result in more damage through an oversized development project that is itself damaging. Does that help?
Yeah.
Does anybody else know anything? Has anybody else heard Mr. O'Neill say?
I did remember him saying that at the township, who I would implement it because I don't really know who he says.
Incidentally, it's up to 500,000, right? So incidentally, it's
I think it's up to.
the developer has said, quote unquote, he's prepared to provide up to that money of 500,000. But essentially, it may not be that high, and that's important to note. Up to does not necessarily mean 500,000.
If you look at, if you go to my website, there are some comments that we have written. We specifically quote the email, so you can find the exact language. Yeah.
Is there a potential estimated cost of the remediation, full remediation that might put him out? Like maybe if it's $3 million, because the extensive plume, contamination down the plume. Is there any idea of
anybody knows the answer to that because we don't know the extent of the contamination at this point. That data is now being collected. Once we know that and we have a full handle, then one starts to think about what do you have to do, what are the options, and then thinking about the cost of those options. And DEP has said to some of us who have met with them that, when they get to that point, there will be a public meeting where that would be laid out. And in that context, we're not talking about for Mr. O'Neill's partial remediation. We're talking about the full, complete remediation by the responsible parties. I presume if Mr. O'Neill's project goes forward, there's probably also something similar, but in the context of this conversation, it was about the full remediation. But we need more information to know.
My name is Steve Kirchner, and I'm actually in the business of environmental remediation, and I've worked on sites just like this. And to answer your question, I can tell you that if it can be cleaned up, you're probably talking about at least $10 million towards 420 to do the whole thing, and you're talking about a very long time.
Can you explain what you mean by it?
Well, I've seen the contaminant levels that are in the bedrock. That fractured bedrock is one of the hardest things to clean up. So, the DNAPL, which that's the concentrations that you have, DNAPL is the term we use, but just think of little droplets of the TCE just working its way down into all the little fractures. And to sort of try to grasp how difficult it is, when you're driving on the turnpike through the mountains and you're looking at the road cuts and through the bedrock, look at all those little fractures in there. All those, how do you find all those little droplets that are in the fractures? And I think one of them said 400 or 500 feet deep. I don't remember exactly. That's what makes it really, really hard. It's just nobody's got X-ray vision to look 400 feet deep to try to find something. It's just not.
To clean it up, you're trading air pollution for ground pollution. And
I'm not sure why you say that.
because it's air purged. Is that not correct?
Well, there's other ways you can break it down in the ground. There are ways that you can destroy it in the ground. But again, you're talking about hundreds of feet deep. I mean, I've done this at other sites, and oftentimes we accept that we can't get every drop. We might say, we'll get the upper 100 feet and clean that up. And the stuff that's 300 or 400 feet, it's just going to naturally attenuate, and it's okay because no one's drinking the water, it's not discharging.
And here it is discharging, right.
So something, so groundwater that's that deep, if you can show that it's not going to affect anybody, get into a well, you might be able to live with that. It's not your preference, but you may live with it knowing that you've cleaned up the worst stuff at the surface.
May I say something here?
Yes.
It's basically an agreement. You are. Sarah Caspar.
Nice to meet you, Sarah.
I worked in EPA for 16 years, and some of my sites that I had were right around here. The biggest problem here, and the problem with this superficial cleanup that O'Neill proposes, it's not going to clean up anything because of the rock that we have here that has permitted TCE to go all over the place in this valve here. And it's the risk for the Valley Creek coming through the Little Valley Creek. And the Valley Creek, by the way, Trout Unlimited and others cleaned that up so that we could now have trout in it again, so it could be an exceptional stream. So it's not an easy solution, unfortunately, but hopefully with people putting their heads together, they will come up with something that will be workable. But to say, perfectly clean, you can't do that. You just want to get it as clean as possible so that it's not going to harm you.
As safely possible.
that was all, that was super helpful. Thank you both. Any other questions? Yeah.
Have they tested that drip yet?
So the question was whether they had tested the drip. A number of us have reported multiple times. There's a pipe that goes over Little Valley Creek that's dripping and draining into Little Valley Creek. There have been multiple reports to DEP, and DEP there were a couple of different efforts to deal with it, like plugging it at a manhole and other efforts that proved unsuccessful. What I understand from DEP, as of last Friday, they cut the pipe so it no longer crosses the creek, and they've plugged it on both sides. That's my understanding of what they've done to stop that ongoing discharge into the creek from the pipe which is coming off the site. I haven't seen it, but that's what was explained to me. Well, I mean, they plugged, tested what was in it. There was testing, I believe, what was in it. I don't remember what it was, but, you know, it was such that...
Heavy metals.
Heavy metals.
Pickering operations, all heavy metals. Fluorides and heavy metals from pickering.
So fluorides and heavy metals from the pickling operations, David was saying, and so it was bad, and it had to be dealt with, and it was O'Neill's responsibility, because that's who they were talking to, and that's the current solution, which hopefully, you know, is work, because that's good. That's good if we stop that discharge.
With the other contaminants present, why is TCE the only target? Do you know?
Well, I mean, I can't say that it's honestly the only thing that they're going to deal with, but this is the thing they're mainly focused on because this is the most dangerous. This has the highest concentrations. This is what's migrating off of the site. And so, you know, this is where their focus is because of the toxins that we're talking about, or the toxin that we're talking about.
Hi, Scott Lambert. It's a premature question, but in your discussion with DEP, do you have a sense that they are fully committed to full remediation at some point?
So the question is whether or not DEP is committed to full remediation at some point. And as we've explained, as the gentleman here who does it has explained, you know, there are standards under the law, and there are varying standards, and they don't necessarily require you to go back to zero. I mean, we even showed the groundwater standard, you know, is 5. So, but the law mandates that they achieve one of these standards under the law. If we're talking about residential, or we're talking about, you know, a park where you're going to have that primary contact, there are standards that have to be achieved. Now, there are options under the law, but these are all options that are designed to prevent pathways of exposure and to ensure that people are not coming into contact. And there are different ways you do that. Some of it might be by containing it. Some of it might be by cleaning it up. You know, DEP has to be committed to that because that's what the law is. And if DEP doesn't fulfill that legal obligation, then that's why you have lawsuits. Gentleman in the back.
David Maddow, Paxton, Pennsylvania. I'm one of the well owners who got contaminated by Sunoco. My question is for the TCE. Is there anybody on wells in this area that's had the water tested? If there are no well owners, has Aqua been involved in testing all of your water for any contamination that can run into the aquifers that Aqua pulls off for your water?
So is Paula here?
Yeah. She's in the back.
She's in the back. Paula?
She's just
So do you want to, that gentleman was asking about anybody on wells who's had their well contaminated by Bishop 2. Do you want to put a cookie in my mouth? That's all right. Swallow it. It's this gentleman over here. I think the mic will work from up here, but maybe you want to come to the front.
Well, how about halfway?
You do that? You do everything?
Over here, this gentleman right here.
I don't live in the area, but we have a well that was contaminated with Sunoco. My question is, because of the TCE, has anybody's wells been tested for this chemical? And since most of you are probably on Aqua, is Aqua involved in testing your water for this chemical?
Well, I was
born in 1951, and my father had just built a house for us, and he had dug a well. And we drank the water from that well. That was all of our family kind of came and went, but was always there because it was a home base. And we drank that water for years. Didn't know there was anything wrong with it, but somebody tested it in suburban water for some reason. I forget.
They predated, there was a suburban water.
Yeah, suburban water from,
They
yeah,
tested
from-
our water, and my father got a letter out of the clear blue sky saying that his precious well was contaminated by, horrendous, deadly levels of some kind of horrible thing, and that we'd better minimize consumption. And, we had been drinking it, and I'm sure that's why my mother and my brother died of cancer, and they had multiple cancers. My family had multiple cancers, and we didn't know anything about it, that there was anything wrong with the water, but our groundwater is severely contaminated, and our house is really sick. We know it, it's obvious. We're like right across the highway from where the plant is.
So that's just one example. The thing is, different people are impacted in different ways. The surrounding landowners, there's one folks that have concerns about what may or may not be coming into their basement. There's been some testing in their basement. There are the folks that live immediately adjacent to this highly contaminated site. They have concerns about their property values, their health, and of course there are kids that play in the creek, have played in the creek for years, play in the creek downstream. So wells is certainly an important one, and Paula is one of our examples of people that have been affected that way. But there are a lot of community members that are being affected in a variety of ways. And so we're trying to make sure that everybody is protected, and the way to do that is by getting this site fully cleaned up to the highest legal standards possible and having it protected as natural open space rather than partial remediation and development that literally brings people to the nuisance, so to speak, legal speak. Any other questions? Yeah.
I'm Janine Spiker, and I live in East Whiteland Township. So my road backs up to People's Lane Theater, and the creek is right there. When I was at the meeting at the middle school, somebody mentioned something about them doing testing in People's Lane Theater, in the property and in the water. Is there documentation? Where would I find it? I live there. I'm not for 38 years. Haven't heard one truck, one drilling, nothing. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, so the question is, people who live down by People's Lane, like theater company, I don't know. I think I've gone to plays there. I don't know why I can't remember the name. So there is testing that, like I said, is trying to determine the extent of the plume, and because the plume has gone as far, down towards the theater, they are definitely looking in that area, right? They're trying to. So the data is being collected. The data that gets collected gets put in reports that go to the DEP. A number of the reports that have already data that has already been collected, you can find on the DEP website. You can find some of it cited in the expert reports on the Delaware Riverkeeper Network website. This is the kind of thing, the reports, it's a lot of data. This is looking at Little Valley Creek. So they are collecting data. That data may not yet be available to the public, but it will be available to the public once this, this round of data collection has completed and they put it in their report and submitted it to DEP. It is then officially a public document. And as such, we all have the right to review it and even comment on it and say to DEP what we think about it. So if you haven't heard, you may heard. Also, DEP, they're updating it, and I think they said it's going to be like 2 weeks, right, till it's revamped. But DEP has created, because of the outcry that we have created, they have created a special website for the Bishop Tube issue. And if you look at do DEP, Bishop Tube, and search for that. We'll put it on the Facebook page when it's up. These reports with that data is the kind of thing that you can find there. And if you can't find it there, then it's a matter of doing file reviews and right to know requests, which is what Delaware Riverkeeper Network does. And we probably have it in our files, and we certainly will when it's done. Does that help?